Some people might be skeptical of the idea that just because we find a source, therefore, the idea is that these people weren't going out of their way to say, oh, this is biblical literature, and here's why you have to believe in the risen Christ. In the case of this creedal affirmation, this was just a casual letter to another church. So that says a lot about what their beliefs were, because, and historians really value this, on passing data. The term is to say something in passing. So the idea is that if people are not going out of their way to prove something, then it's highly likely that that certain claim is true. The existence of a historical Jesus and his crucifixion is not disputed due to a scholarly consensus. We have 1 to 2 dozen early, reliable, and independent historical sources for the existence of Jesus of Nazareth, and the first ones that come to mind to me are Josephus, Tacitus, Pliny the Younger, his correspondence with Emperor Trajan. That's a big one. There's an emperor of this gigantic empire who would have access to government records affirming that Jesus for sure was crucified under Pontius Pilate. And then you have like Lucian of Samosata, Suetonius. Those were the Roman historians that I just listed. You also have like Jewish historians. Okay, Josephus is technically both, but you also have Jewish historians or Jewish historical sources such as the Talmud and the Targums, Amar Bar Serapion. Yeah, but those are the first ones that came to my mind. This is way a lot. It's an embarrassing amount for how many sources we have for the historical Jesus, because this is more than the amount we have for our Caesars and Alexander the Great, figures we know for sure existed. Jesus' death by crucifixion under Pontius Pilate is as sure as anything historical can ever be. For if no follower of Jesus had written anything for 100 years after his crucifixion, we would still know about him from authors not among his supporters. This is a quote by John Dominic Crossan, by the way. This guy is the co-founder of the Jesus Seminar, a group of mostly non-Christian, or what we would associate to be non-Christian scholars of Christianity. That's a big statement, as sure as anything historical can ever be. That's a big statement for the ancient world. And over here, I just have a quick clip of Bart Ehrman, the United States' most famous skeptic, just going off of Jesus' mythicists. In this context, I'm assuming he received some sort of award. So the idea is that someone asks him, I don't see evidence for a historical Jesus, but then he just goes on to roast him for why he's horribly wrong. So without further ado, let's get to that.
I do not see evidence in archaeology or history for a historical Jesus.
Yeah, well, I do. I mean, that's why I wrote the book. Well, I mean, okay, yeah. I mean, I have a whole book on it. I mean, so there is a lot of evidence. I mean, there is so much evidence that it is not. I mean, I know in the crowds you all run around with, it's commonly thought that Jesus did not exist. Let me tell you, once you get outside of your conclave, there's nobody who. I mean, this is not even an issue for scholars of antiquity. It is not an issue for scholars. There is no scholar in any college or university in the Western world who teaches classics, ancient history, New Testament, early Christianity, any related field who doubts that Jesus existed. Now, that is not evidence. That is not evidence. Just because everybody thinks so doesn't make it evidence. But if you want to know about the theory of evolution versus the theory of creationism, and every scholar in every reputable institution in the world believes in evolution, it may not be evidence, but if you've got a different opinion, you better have a pretty good piece of evidence yourself. The reason for thinking Jesus existed is because he is abundantly attested in early sources. That's why. And I give the details in my book. Early and independent sources indicate that certainly that Jesus existed. One author that we know about knew Jesus' brother and knew Jesus' closest disciple, Peter. He's an eyewitness to both Jesus' closest disciple and his brother. So, I mean, I'm sorry, but again, I respect your disbelief, but if you want to go where the evidence goes, I think that atheists have done themselves a disservice by jumping on the bandwagon of mythicism, because, frankly, it makes makes you look foolish to the outside world. If that's what you're going to believe, you just look foolish. You are much better off going with historical evidence and arguing historically rather than coming up with the theory that Jesus didn't exist.
Okay, and that is Bart Ehrman, North America's most renowned skeptic of Christianity, who specializes in early Christianity. Alright, this addresses the swoon hypothesis. And unfortunately, we have absolutely no historical evidence of anyone surviving a full Roman crucifixion. We have one single account of someone being half crucified. He was taken down early. He didn't go through the same type of beating, exhaustion, public humiliation, flogging that Jesus went through. They were just a bunch of street criminals, unlike Jesus, who was like this really popular guy, and they would have wanted to see him dead and would have made sure he was dead, because that was the policy of the Romans, right? If you let someone get away as a Roman guard, you would have been killed for that. And in the case of this account, it tells us that 3 of Josephus's friends were half crucified and were taken down early, and despite the best medicine and care they had at the time, 2 of them died anyway. Now, we see in the Gospel of John that Jesus also went through what is typically called a crura fragium, and we find this concept of a crura fragium in other sources. The idea is that it's a death checkup to make sure that the person was officially dead on the cross, and that would include breaking of the legs, because the legs were the only thing that kept the crucified victim from asphyxiation on the cross. In the case of Jesus, it was stabbing him with a spear, many other ways. Here's really what nails it on the cross, so to speak. Nails it on the cross. Enlightenment philosopher David Strauss and his Strauss critique. He is an atheist philosopher, but I think this was written 300 years ago. He was the last person to have actually considered this a relevant theory. And he wrote, "It is impossible that a being who had stolen half dead, crept about weak and ill, and wanting medical treatment, could have given the disciples the impression that he was the conqueror over death and the grave, the Prince of Life, an impression that lay at the bottom of their future ministry." So you could just get this idea, like, okay, so what if Jesus survived? Would he have even survived getting to the disciples? How would he even have known that they were the disciples, or after he had like all of these pounds and wrappings all over his face, like after so many hours, after 3 days, roll away like this stone, and then he's like beaten and like the blood's dripping from him, and you can just imagine like Peter and the disciples looking at him, and many others, including Paul, just saying, "Behold, look at the Prince of Life, look at the person who was resurrected from the dead." You know, it's just completely foolish. Now, the conspiracy theories, the idea that the disciples lied. The genuine sincerity of Christian belief doesn't make sense to have if you were lying. This is especially true if you had previously skeptical and hostile converts who saw the risen Jesus, in the case of Paul and James, the brother of Jesus. The conviction of martyrdom was so strong for early Christians, that's actually where we got the term. Martyr originally had meant to witness, but in the context of Christian thought, it was so used that it came to mean that you died for your belief. And we see this develop through the early patristic fathers such as Clement of Rome, Justin Martyr. We know by Justin Martyr it was already official because that was already his name. Paul, Christianity's prior sworn and vehement enemy. James, the brother of Jesus, a previously unbeliever, and possibly many others suffered martyrdom. And I say possibly many others, but we know for sure that Paul and James, the brother of Jesus, were martyred. James, the brother of Jesus, was recorded in somewhere in Josephus's Antiquities of the Jews. Paul, we see that in Clement's epistle to the Romans. And we know that according to Pliny's formula with his correspondence with Emperor Trajan, Christians were given chances to recant their belief many times. And if they didn't, they were continued to be brutally tortured and then put to death.